You ever heard of this? The idea that you can get high just from listening to a sound file? I know, it sounds like something straight out of a sci fi movie. But believe it or not, thousands of people are actually trying it. So today, we're going to decode the mystery behind this thing called digital drugs, a phenomenon that has some people really worried and researchers totally fascinated. Okay, let's get into it.
I mean, that's the big question, right? Can a simple audio track, something you stream off the internet, actually change your state of mind in a way that feels like a drug? Well, the answer? It's a lot more complicated than you might think.
And that's the name they've been given, digital drugs. You gotta admit, it's a term that's designed to grab your attention. It sparks a little bit of curiosity and maybe even a little bit of fear. But what are they, really? All right, so let's start with all the hype. Because this isn't just some weird fringe thing on the internet. Oh no. This is a phenomenon that has actually made headlines and caused some real-world concern. Just look at the names of some of these tracks. The marketing is, well, it's not subtle. You can find audio files named to mimic specific drugs, promising you the same effects. You've got Molly Rave Riot, you've got cannabis references. I mean, they're being incredibly direct about it. So yeah, it's no wonder people are paying attention.
And of course, the media just ate this up. They even coined a catchy name for it, idosing. Soon, there were all these reports raising alarms about a new way for teens to experiment, and that created this huge wave of concern among parents and schools. But, before we get too carried away, let's actually look at the science behind all this.
So how is any of this even supposed to work? Well, the technology at the very core of these so-called digital drugs is something called binaural beats. Okay, this right here is the key. It's not about the sounds themselves, it's about how your brain puts them together. And you absolutely need headphones for this to work. Each ear gets a slightly different frequency, and your brain basically does the math and hears a third phantom beat that isn't even there. It's an auditory illusion. And here's a super simple way to see it. Let's say your left ear hears a tone at 315 hertz, and your right ear hears one at 325 hertz. Your brain, it creates this phantom beat at 10 hertz, which is just the difference between the two. Pretty wild, right? So the whole theory behind this is something called brainwave entrainment. The idea is that this phantom 10 hertz beat can actually encourage your brainwaves to sync up with it. And since different brainwave frequencies are tied to different states of mind, like alpha waves for relaxation or beta waves for focus, the goal is to kind of nudge your brain into a desired state just by listening. Okay, so that's the theory. But who is actually doing this? And are they all really trying to get high? Well, the Global Drug Survey from 2021 gave us some really fascinating data on this. Let's take a look. So they surveyed over 30,000 people across 22 countries, and it turns out 5.3% of them said they've used binaural beats to try and experience an altered state. Now, it's not a massive number, but it definitely confirms this is a real global thing. And this is where the whole story takes a major turn. Just look at these reasons. The overwhelming majority, we're talking over 70%, are using these sounds to relax or to fall asleep. A huge chunk are using them to connect with themselves. And the people actually trying to simulate other drugs, that's only about 12%. This completely flips that whole media narrative on its head. And get this, the typical user isn't some rebellious teenager. The median age is 27. They're a bit more likely to be male, and they're mostly just listening on their phones through video streaming sites. This paints a very different picture from the one we were sold, doesn't it? So that brings us to the million-dollar question. Do they actually work? Are these things a revolutionary new healing tool, a total letdown, or maybe just a good way to give yourself a headache? Now, to be fair, there is some real science that backs up some of the potential benefits. A few studies have found positive results for things like reducing pain and anxiety, and even for boosting memory. So it's not complete pseudoscience. There's something there that's definitely worth looking into. But then you have the actual user experience. This quote from a reporter at Relix magazine who tried a dose meant to feel like alcohol kind of sums up what a lot of people report. Not much of anything, except maybe a headache. That grand mind-altering experience, it often just doesn't happen. And so, at the end of the day, the scientific jury is still very much out. The general consensus is that the evidence is pretty inconsistent, and we just need more, better research. So there's potential for sure, but all those wild claims, they're still largely unproven.
So, if the effects are still up in the air and most people are just using them to chill out, why the big scare? Well, this is where it gets really interesting, because we can reframe this entire discussion by looking at it as a potential moral panic.
A moral panic is basically when society as a whole gets gripped by a fear that's way out of proportion to the actual threat. And the media plays a huge role in this, creating these folk devils, groups or things that become a symbol for everything that's supposedly wrong with our way of life.
And this is a brilliant way to see that this is not a new pattern. At all, society has a long, long history of panicking about new things, especially stuff that young people are into. Jazz music was seen as corrupting, the mods and rockers in the UK were seen as folk devils, and we all remember the panic over video games supposedly causing violence. So, is idosing just the latest chapter in that same old story?
The sociologist Stanley Cohen actually laid out 5 classic stages for how this works. First, a threat is defined. Then the media blows it up. Public concern grows. The authorities have to respond. And then eventually the whole thing just fades away. You can almost map the story of digital drugs perfectly onto this framework. Which brings us right back to our central question, but now with a lot more nuance. The reality of binaural beats seems to be a mix of all these things, right? It's a potential therapeutic tool for some, a harmless curiosity for most, and maybe a folk devil for a society that's just anxious about new technology. And maybe, in the end, the story of digital drugs is less about the technology itself and more about our own fears and hopes for what's coming next. It really forces us to ask, when we're faced with something new, something strange, do we react with curiosity or do we react with panic? What we choose, well, that says a lot about us.